the recording has started, we are going to be providing this. Good morning, Ken Sauer. Pleased to have you. We are going to be recording this for posterity and providing a link to anybody who wants to watch it after if you can't stay for the entirety. I haven't really set a time limit on this webinar because I think we want to take as long as it takes to get the information that Elston wants to get out. And of course, Elston will tell you that he really only wants to speak for 45 minutes, but it can turn into an hour and a half because he gets rolling. He's extremely passionate. I think you guys are in for a treat today. Who are we? We are Aberhart Ag Solutions. We are involved in the marketing and distribution of an elemental sulfur product called Bio-Sul Premium Plus in the provinces of Saskatchewan and Manitoba. You can find out a lot more about us by traveling to our website on the interwebs, aberhartagsolutions.ca. There's all kinds of information about us on there. My name is Dan Aberhart, and along with Terry Aberhart and my father, Harvey Aberhart, we are the Aberharts. We are Aberhart Ag Solutions, and we are solely in the business today of distributing this elemental sulfur fertilizer. The agenda today is going to be very straightforward, ladies and gentlemen. I've got a few rules of engagement. I've got a fun little thing at the beginning here to go through with you guys. But then we're going to turn it over to Elston Solberg, who's going to be talking to us about some of the research and data that he's been involved with elemental sulfur for 30-some years, which is what this is all about. I have muted all the participants of this webinar until the end of the presentation. It's not like I don't love you guys and want to hear from you guys and want your input. It's just that in my experience on these webinars, if you don't, you get a lot of background noise and feedback. So for the quality of the call, for the quality of the presentation, I've just muted everybody. Now at the end, we can certainly open it up for questions, and Elston loves to have feedback. If you text me your questions as we go to 204-573-2069, or you message me within the chat, or you email me at dan@aberhartagsolutions.ca, I'll do my best to ask Elston these questions in real time, but we will open up the floor at the end for Q&A. In general, it's still a good idea to mute your phone if you're not talking, and as I said, we'll be recording this event. So the question I like to start with always is why, to explain why we're doing this. And I think it's one of those harebrained ideas that Elston and I come up with. We're always jamming on what we should do next or how to bring more information to the market about this product. I think this is a great platform to reach people that are existing in the network, but also people that are new to the product and the concept, the idea that we're espousing. And we find that when we go out and we talk about elemental sulfur, there's a tremendous amount of education to be done. And that is what today is about, is education about sulfur and specifically elemental sulfur. So I want to just go through a quick, fun 10 factoids that you may or may not know about sulfur before I introduce our star keynote speaker, Elston Solberg. And I want to know, Elston, how many of these things you already knew. So they're just 10 fun little factoids about sulfur. The first one is, in the Bible, sulfur is referenced a number of times as brimstone. I thought that was kind of interesting. This is relevant to us. Today, almost all elemental sulfur is produced as a byproduct of removing sulfur-containing contaminants from natural gas or petroleum. That's essentially how we get our raw product as well. The greatest commercial use of the element sulfur is the production of sulfuric acid, which is one of the most common chemicals around the world. And it's used in mining and manufacturing and all kinds of stuff. So a lot of the elemental sulfur that's out west gets shipped all over the world for these processes. Many sulfur compounds, or odoriferous, that's a hard word to say this early in the morning, but we all know that our product has some interesting smells, and we think it's largely because of the compost, but these sulfur compounds can smell as well. And anybody who's used our product knows that it can tend to get into your shoes and your hair and your clothes, and it makes laundry a challenge. While sulfur-containing antibiotics save many lives, sulfur in mustard is a deadly chemical warfare agent. And this is actually a tough thing to Google because it's not a very pretty thing, but it's a fact. It's otherwise known as mustard gas. Disulfides, S-to-S bonds, confer mechanical strength and insolubility of the protein keratin. And I'm sure Elston's going to be talking about proteins and all that and plant life, which is pertinent to us as producers. But I thought it was interesting that sulfur is part of the strength and solubility of keratin, which is found in skin, hair, feathers. The main point here was that sulfur is a building block of all life. And sulfur is originally derived from the Latin word sulphur, which was Hellenized to sulfur. And Hellenized, I found out, means changing to the British form. Sulfur burns with a blue flame with formation of sulfur dioxide, which if you've ever welded on a trailer that has Bio-Sul in it, which Harvey knows about, it has a suffocating and irritating odor. And this is actually a photo of a volcano, I believe in Indonesia, where the sulfur is burning, where many people risk their lives to go into these volcanoes and mines to get this sulfur out. Sulfur is actually created inside massive stars, and that's about all I can understand of this sentence. Maybe Elston knows more about it, but I thought it was very fascinating to know that the sulfur that we're spreading once came from a star, as most things did. And sulfur, this is my final fact, sulfur is the 10th most common element in the universe. I don't know what the other 9 are, but that's certainly interesting. Sulfur is so common. Those are my 10 fun factoids to get us warmed up and get the blood flowing. About our keynote speaker, I mean, I could go on and on about Elston Solberg, but suffice it to say he's been a great friend and mentor and ally to us in bringing this product to market. He's got a huge passion for it, which I think will come across in the presentation. He's highly schooled, U of A, master's in soil science. He worked at the Alberta Research. He did a lot of research with elemental sulfur back in the day. He's been in the waste management industry, which is a nice tie into what we're doing. He was recently presented with the 2016 Canadian Senior Agri-Trend Coach of the Year Award. And so obviously he's a well-respected and well-known agronomist, and it's pretty exciting that we have him here today talking about elemental sulfur. So with that, I'm going to be operating the slides here for Elston. Elston, of those 10 factoids, how many of them did you not know?
I have to admit I didn't know 3 of them, Dano. So you always amaze me with your insanity. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool.
Yeah, some interesting stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So without further ado, Elston, you want to take it away? And if I do get some questions by text or email, again, the number is 204-573-2069. If you want to text me a question, I may stop you at different pertinent points, but otherwise I'll leave the floor to you to talk about sulfur, to educate us about sulfur.
Yeah, sure. It's I want as much as interaction as possible, as always, and so if there's some stuff, Dan, I'll just fire away. I like you alluded to earlier, I don't have a whole bunch of slides here, and I don't anticipate that I'm going to take the whole time, but if there's a lot of questions during the whole thing, I'm good to go until 11 o'clock Saskatchewan time. I got an interview that I have to do here at 11 o'clock that time, but so I can keep going until then. And basically, good morning, everybody. For those of you who know me, my condolences. For the rest of you, I guess we'll wait and see how this whole thing goes. But as Dan has indicated, I've been pretty passionate about elemental sulfur as a fertilizer, and doing elemental sulfur research for the last 37 years of my life, and I think I'm a pretty good resource for the network and for the farmers that you're serving in the network, and I'm more than happy to discuss any aspect of elemental sulfur management that you might have, because pretty much been there, done that, and been all over the world. helping people understand how to simply manage sulfur, which is the title of this whole thing. Keep it simple, sulfur. The product that you're managing, helping farmers manage, is probably agronomically one of the simplest products that we can manage in modern day agriculture. And it's one that not only satisfies logistical issues, and most of us in agriculture abdicate agronomic concerns for logistical concerns. It's a very logistical product. It's also a very agronomic product, and it's something that I'm pretty excited about and have been for a long, long time, elemental sulfur in general. The talk this morning, presentation this morning, is going to be focused primarily on information that I gleaned from a third-party research report that was done by Alberta Innovates in conjunction with the City of Edmonton and with Terra Vita. And one of the pushbacks that a lot of you folks have been getting, at least what I'm hearing, is, where's the third-party research? Where's the third-party research? Also some admonishment about my involvement, and apparently now that I'm doing research and extension part-time for BioCycle, somehow I'm tainted, and the results that I'm finding are also tainted. So this is basically a third-party research paper that was put together by Danny Dagenhart, whom I've talked to a number of times since I got my hands on this thing. And it's, I think, for those folks out there that want to see that third-party research, what I've done here is I've tried to summarize what was in that report in such a way that you can use the data to counter some of those concerns that folks have about third-party research and whether or not it validates the usability of Bio-Sul as a fertilizer. And so most of my focus will be on this. I will touch a little bit on some other stuff, but at the end of the day, while this third-party research wasn't the best research on the planet, there's some really cool stuff in there that basically corroborates what we've been seeing in the field with Bio-Sul. It corroborates what I've learned in the past during my master's thesis, and then multiple research projects since. So that'll be the focus. Now, one of the things that we all know is that the BioCycle Premium Plus product is a very crude composted product. I mean, compost is crude. So we have everything in the material from very small particles, as small as 1 micron, to fairly large nuggets. And some people will say that is a detriment or a negative. I very strongly believe it's a positive in that if you take into account that wide range of particle sizes and you apply the product in large enough quantities, then you have release over a wide number of years. And so this is a slide that I've been using for a while, and I see that Dan's computer has switched it up a little bit, but if you go up to the next one, Dano, I've tried to switch this a little bit into something that's a little bit more graphically usable. And basically what this is trying to show is that with different particle sizes, it's trying to indicate the release rates for those different particle sizes. Very small particles start converting very quickly, and as the particle sizes become bigger, the release rate slows down. And so basically by applying 200 to 300 pounds of product with this wide range of particle sizes, we have very rapid release and progressively slower release, which allows for 4 or 5 plus years worth of sulfur release to the crops we're growing. And so while Dan's computer has messed up the slide a little bit, the original can be quite helpful. Now go ahead, Dan. So all of that to say is that this is not new information. You can go to the internet, you can go to my master's thesis, you can go to a number of different sources that essentially tell us the exact same thing. And if you just click it one time, I think a little box will come down. Yeah, no, there you go. This is a slide that I borrowed, I think, from the Canola Council. You can find dozens of these in hundreds of other research reports, basically showing the same thing. As particle sizes increase, the rate of conversion from elemental sulfur to sulfate, crop available sulfate sulfur slows down. This is some work that was done some time ago and is readily available, and it's just, there's all kinds of third-party research out there that corroborates what this report indicates and what I've been advocating and seeing in my research for years and years and years and years. So this is not new information. This is, in some regard, very old information, and for whatever reason, agronomists in agriculture in Western Canada are ignorant of it and or unaware of it and or whatever. It's different in Western Canada for some reason. It's not different in Western Canada. Small particles convert quickly, and as the particles become larger, they convert less quickly, and it's just about that simple. Keep it simple, sulfur.
So
keep on going down
here, Elston. Like this left-hand column is the size of meshes per inch. You've further clarified that in blue, that that's the actual micron sizes.
Exactly.
And
so if you just pick out,
you have the time it takes to oxidize.
Yeah, so you've got some really large particles, the 5 to 10 meshes per inch. Even at that size, which is pretty large, we're still getting 1 to 2% oxidation or conversion of elemental to sulfate in 2 to 4 weeks. And as you go from those large particles down to the smaller and progressively smaller and smaller sizes, and BioSol's got particles that are as small as 1 micron, you can see how the rate of conversion speeds up. And this is the kind of stuff that I've seen repeatedly over the 3 or 4 decades now with the products that I've worked with, and more recently with the BioSul fertilizer. So it shouldn't be a big surprise that we're seeing the results that we're seeing, and it shouldn't be a big surprise that the tissue tests that are coming back after 3 and 4 years of the first applications, the tissues are all coming back really, really strong. We've got different categories of particle sizes that are releasing at different rates, and it's biological release that's connected to the growth of the crop and the conditions in the field, and it's just more of the same. All of this has been known for a long, long time.
So if
Next
people
slide.
are wondering why BioCell is so available as such, we look at 80% oxidized, everything under roughly 100 microns, 80% oxidized within 2 weeks. And then we look at our scale here, 10% of the product is less than 200 microns. So that's why we're seeing such good availability.
Exactly. And the product, it's, nobody will say much about it, but the product does contain a small amount of sulfate sulfur as well. So you've got that immediate availability, and then the small particles just start converting instantaneously. So, and then you've got all of the rest of it that will ensure release over a period of years. So again, logistics trumps agronomics in most cases, but this is one case where not only do we have a very sound logistical product, given the rates that we're applying, 200 to 300 pounds per acre, it's also an extremely agronomic product because every crop we grow requires sulfur. And just like phosphorus and potassium, the industry is notoriously guilty of not applying enough sulfur as compared to the removal rates of sulfur, of phosphorus, of potassium. So this is a really good agronomic story that happens to mesh up with a really good logistical story. So on the side of every crop needs sulfur every year, you know, when Tiger came out with this many moons ago, I thought it was brilliant. And basically, at the end of the day, many of us on this call have got target yields that are similar to what's in this table, if not higher. We could quibble about whether those target yields are the ones we should be using, but at the end of the day, if you look at the requirements that those yield goals we need, and then look at what's removed, and consider that most of the industry only applies sulfur in the canola portion of the rotation. So in the bottom right-hand corner, in a canola wheat rotation, there's roughly a 21-pound deficit if we're only putting sulfur on in the canola portion of the rotation. If we're in a 3-year rotation that includes peas, then now we're at about a 39-pound deficit, and this is true of the bulk of the acres across Western Canada. Similar numbers could be found for phosphorus and potassium. So the reality is, as we look into the future, and we're growing more and more crop on the same acres, we need to, as an industry, think about the total sulfur requirements, and more importantly, the total sulfur removal of the yields that we're expecting growers to grow as we move into the future. So every crop needs sulfur every year. Yes, different crops have different levels of requirement and different levels of removal, but at the end of the day, every crop needs sulfur every year. And so what we found over the years is that if we can narrow down our nitrogen to sulfur ratios in all of the crops we grow, including malt barley, not only does our yields go up, but the quality of the crops go up, et cetera, and the efficiency of the whole system starts to improve. And so for some of you on the call, I have a little spreadsheet that I'm more than happy to share with anybody, where you can plug in your own rotation, where you can plug in your own target yield goals, and then you can use that as a tool for your own benefit or your farmer friends' benefit to show what those yield goals have in terms of total requirement and in terms of total sulfur removal as well. And it can be a fairly powerful tool in a lot of circumstances.
In general, Elston, in your travels, I mean, you talk with a lot of producers and work with some producers one-on-one. Are you seeing that producers are putting down enough sulfur in general, and if not, why not?
Well, the folks that we work with, or I work with, are kind of different cats. But even so, in general, they're not putting on as much sulfur as their crops require. So we're talking about some of the better growers in the industry, and not really being where they're at for a lot of different reasons. You know, ammonium sulfate in a tank takes up a lot of volume. If you seed place it, it can be pretty nasty under the wrong circumstances, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to wider and wider row spacing with narrower and narrower openers, less options of placement of all of the nutrients that we apply. All kinds of things kind of gang up to force farmers to make logistical decisions that are not agronomic, and sulfur is in that realm of decisions that where basically not enough sulfur is going on to satisfy the removals of the crops that we grow. So the industry, sulfur, phosphorus, potassium, that's endemic for all three of those nutrients. And you know, I'm soon 61 years old, but I plan on being around for quite a bit longer. And as an industry, this is, you know, a fairly significant issue. Long-winded answer. Next slide, Daniel. So I don't know what's coming up next.
Is everybody able to hear myself and Elston okay? I'm getting one text here that there's some audio issues. If there's any issues, please text me at 204-573-2069 or email me at dan@aberhartagsolutions.ca. But I can still hear the audio great, so I'm not sure if we're having issues across the border. That's just one individual. I also have a text here from Jesse Clock saying, I can hear great. He said, remind people to hit the top left phone button. So there's a number of different audio options in the call. So hopefully everybody can hear the call. If you're having audio issues, I think we're still on track. We can provide you the recording if you're not able to get audio individually right now. But I think everything's still working. So we'll continue on. Thanks, Elston. Just go ahead there.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Everything's coming back to me pretty solid, so I hope it's coming from my end pretty solid. This slide is another slide that basically talks about the pushback. Elemental sulfur. You apply elemental sulfur, it's going to create acidity. And that's true. The reality, though, is every fertilizer that we apply creates acidity, and some fertilizers create more acidity than does elemental sulfur. It's surprising how few people in the industry actually know all of this or remember all of this, but that pushback is consistent, and this table can be quite useful in countering that. The thing that this table does not show is that all of the fertilizers that we generally use, with the exception of potash, they all create acidity chemically. So it's a very rapid creation of acidity, whereas elemental sulfur, particularly this product, because it has a wide range of particle sizes, creates biological acidity over a long period of time. From a plant's perspective, from a soil's perspective, it's like comparing apples to watermelons, completely different things. And so, yeah, elemental sulfur creates acidity, but it's biological and it's slow and it's consistent, whereas fertilizer that we apply creates acidity very rapidly, and it's chemical. Two different worlds, two different realities from a plant's perspective, from a soil's perspective. A table like this can be helpful for those folks that push back with that concern.
Elston, I think this is a good time to ask a question from the audience. One of Jesse Clock's customers: how many pounds of elemental does it take to move pH?
Down?
It doesn't specify, just in general.
Yes. Well, knowing a little bit from where Jesse's at, I mean, one of the uses of elemental sulfur over the last couple centuries has been to reduce soil pH. You know, a lot of high soil pHs out there. Folks want to grow specific crops, specific high-value crops. They'll put on elemental to drive the soil pH down. And in most circumstances, we're talking about thousands and thousands of pounds per acre, like thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of elemental sulfur per acre. So, yeah, we can do it. On the flip side of that, if we're worried about reducing soil pH with agronomic rates, even the large agronomic rates we're advocating with BioCycle, Bio-Sul, it takes thousands and thousands of pounds to significantly move soil pH in general. So I don't know if that answers Jesse's question.
You bet. And just a note on that, this product actually stores on the ground. And one of the challenges with that, although it has many benefits, the zone of where the product's been placed, the pH can be lowered such that it's hard to grow anything there because you've got thousands and thousands of pounds on that spot. So we always caution our customers, in a way it's pretty nice. We don't have to factor in the cost of bins, and there's other positive aspects of storing the product outside, but it can, you got to be careful where you place it, because it can lower the pH to the point where the land's not as productive.
Yeah, it's a good point, and it's kind of a geeky, funny point too. Is, you know, a lot of people will tell you that should know better will tell you that elemental sulfur is not available until the second year after application. And I know, and many of us on the call know, that that's simply not true. And then, when you pile this stuff up in fields, it leaves this dead spot. And the reason there's a dead spot is the stuff is actually broken down, quite quickly, because there are those small particle sizes, and because when it gets piled up, it's not thousands and thousands of pounds, it's 10,000s of pounds per equivalent per acre. And so those dead spots actually, from a twisted perspective, is a good sign that the elemental sulfur is breaking down. It's something that we want to avoid for sure, but it's a clear sign that the elemental sulfur is breaking down. And one of the advantages of the Bio-Sul is that there are organisms already in the Bio-Sul that begin the conversion process immediately. And we'll see here in a few minutes when we get into this report, this third-party report, that they corroborate the presence of these organisms in the material.
How do you see the pH thing playing out across Western Canada on a large scale? I mean, you talk about it all the time, written articles about it. It's one of your fascinations with pH. How do you see this playing out on a large scale? I mean, with variable rate technology and the right product, how do you see that pH playing out in Western Canada?
Well, strangely enough, the reason I'm down in Spokane is I'm down here to help folks tackle the problem of low soil pH in this part of the world. And there's a number of novel ways of attacking low soil pH in all parts of the world. And the parallels between the Pacific Northwest and between Western Canada, the parallels are amazingly similar. So the way it rolls in Western Canada, there's about 20 million acres of land that is affected by low soil pH. Of those 20 million acres, to put all of that into perspective, that's 10 times more land than all of the farmland that's farmed in the Netherlands. It's more than all of the land farmed in the UK. It's more than all of the land farmed in Indiana. So it's a big piece of real estate, but here's where it gets tricky or fun, is that of those 20 million acres, only 30 to 40% of those acres need to be treated. In other words, pH can be extremely variable across fields. And so the future for the Pacific Northwest, the future for Western Canada, is going to be about identifying the 30 to 40% of any given field and that has low soil pH, and concentrating our efforts on that 30 to 40%. And as luck would have it, the usual way we do that is by spreading lime or limestone, and the machinery that's being used to apply Bio-Sul is the same machinery that could be used to apply lime on a variable rate basis. So for those applicators that are out there, those farmers that are out there that have the necessary equipment to apply the Bio-Sul, you now also have the necessary equipment to variable rate apply lime and treat those 30 to 40% of that 20 million acres, and in so doing improve the overall productivity of that 30 to 40% for 5 to 10 years with each application. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it is a big mother of a fish that we need to start frying here. And the reality is we can pretty simply variable rate Bio-Sul. We can pretty simply variable rate a lot of things, and lime will be one of the big issues for the Jesse clocks and others on the call that have 30 or 40 more crops in them. It'll be a big deal going forward.
Beauty.
Yeah, it's exciting stuff. So we're just going to jump into the Alberta Innovates report here now, and just keep cycling through there, Dano. Got my hands on this. Was able to talk to the lead researcher, Danny Dagenhart. She's been very helpful This is a bricks and mortar operation that's in Edmonton. And just some of the highlights of this study that they did. And so this is kind of where things get a little bit fun. You know, we're looking at a product that's very similar to Bio-Sul. It's comprised of waste base pad elemental sulfur and City of Edmonton compost. They want to show how effective this material is. And one of the first things I identified in looking at the study is that they picked a soil that is not sulfur deficient. And that makes no sense to me. If you want to show sulfur response, you would think that they'd want to pick a soil that was sulfur deficient, but they did manage to pick one that was screamingly nitrogen deficient. As a researcher looking at this kind of stuff, I'm kind of going, why would we do that? Now, they tried to address the nitrogen side of the equation by putting on the equivalent of 50 pounds per acre, but when you're looking at these extremely low levels of nitrogen, that doesn't even come close to cutting it, because anybody that's on the call will know that a 60 bushel canola crop is going to need about 200 pounds of nitrogen equivalent per acre to achieve that yield goal, if not more. Why they did this, I have no idea. Then the other thing they did is they applied the elemental sulfur by trying to simulate direct seeding. In other words, they put the elemental sulfur in these greenhouse pots, and they put the elemental sulfur in the soil. So one of the things that we've learned early back in the 1980s was that if you want to optimize conversion of elemental sulfur to sulfate, crop available sulfate, you need to basically broadcast the material on the soil surface and then let Mother Nature disperse the particles and give contact with the soil so that the organisms that are in the soil can find those dispersed particles and begin their job of oxidation. For whatever reason, in this study for the first growth cycle, and there were 2 growth cycles, they simulated direct seeding, which again makes no sense to me. Next slide, Dano. So they had a number of treatments where they basically had a control. They had a number of different rates of just straight compost. Then they had a number of different rates of sulfur compost. So they had sulfur mixed in with the compost. They had 3 replicates of all of that. There's just some data. And one of the intriguing things is that they calculated their application rates based on surface area, which, again, to me makes no sense for lots of different geeky reasons, which we don't have time to get into here. But there's what the experiment looks like. Continue on, Dano. Here's what it looks like in the greenhouse. So there was 2 growth cycles back to back. They grew canola. The first growth cycle with where they simulated direct seeding, so they intentionally minimized the amount of dispersion of the elemental sulfur. And then before the second growth cycle, they soil sampled, and in the process of taking soil samples and stuff, they essentially stirred up the soil somewhat, and basically what that did then was disperse the elemental sulfur in the pots. And so there was 2 growth cycles. First was on simulated direct seeding. The second one was after they had stirred up the soil somewhat. Continue, Dano. This is kind of like a rat talk, and I apologize for that, but this is the best third-party research with this specific product out there. Here's a picture of growth cycle 1 and of the plants, representative plants in growth cycle 1, and I think there's one from growth cycle 2 next. Maybe not. And anyway, when we looked at all of the data, and so what I did is I took all of the canola yield data and from both growth cycles and combined them, and then averaged everything out, despite the fact we had a non-sulfur deficient soil, despite the fact that we had a extremely nitrogen deficient soil. The sulfur compost treatments on average out-yielded the check or the straight compost treatment, which is in the middle, by 19%. I think if you click it, that should come up. So there's something going on there that's as a researcher, I look at this and I go, there's something going on here that is over and above a sulfur response, and that's pretty cool. And it's stuff that corroborates what we identified back in the 90s in some sulfur research where we mimicked or looked at the soil characteristics around individual particles and individual prills in soils, and we found that around those individual particles or prills in soils, what happens is because the organisms are breaking down the elemental sulfur there biologically, you get that biological acid, which makes phosphorus more available, all of the micronutrients more available, etc. And as a consequence, that translates into higher yield potential. For some of you, it might be worthwhile reviewing a concept called the law of the maximum, where you manage one thing that improves the reactivity or the benefit of a whole bunch of other things. And I think that's what we're seeing here. When we have sulfur and compost mixed together, despite the fact that there is no sulfur deficiency, we're still seeing a 19% yield increase in the canola biomass. And God knows what we would have seen if there would have been enough nitrogen in the system.
One of the things you're working on, too, for the benefit of the group, is you're working to identify the nature, the species, the mode of activity of the bugs in the compost, correct?
That's correct, yeah. Yeah, so at the end of the day, we'll be able to say in these Bio-Sul compost, there is at least these, pick a number, 10 different species of organisms that break down elemental sulfur and create that biological acidity around those particle sizes, which allow for the release of other nutrients from the soil to become crop available. So this is cool. This is like really, really cool, and it basically corroborates what I just said. Is that when we looked at individual nutrients, the sulfur compost increased the uptake of all of those nutrients with one exception, and the only nutrient that the sulfur compost did not increase the concentration of was potassium. So pretty much everything else we looked at on the macronutrient side, nitrogen, phosphorus, obviously sulfur, magnesium, calcium, all of those levels increased. The only one that decreased slightly was potassium. So that's the macros. We flip to the next slide. The same is true for all of the micros. So again, I think it's just going back to what we discovered back in the 90s, is that around those particles, the organisms are oxidizing, creating biological acid. That biological acid is solubilizing out nutrients from the soil itself, making them more available to the crop. And those two slides, these last two slides basically help explain why they saw a 19% yield increase from the sulfur composted treatments versus the straight compost treatments.
Oh,
pretty cool stuff.
It really relates to the financial efficiency of this product too, because if you look at releasing these macros and these micros, you're getting more of what's in the soil, so that you've got to factor that extra sulfur in on the financial side as well, and that's something that Tiger 90's done a really good job of quantifying in their webinars, exactly how much benefit there is financially to having those other macros and micros being more available or active, or however you want to quantify that.
Yeah, and strangely enough, the stuff that we did back in the 90s was in cooperation with those guys. So, I mean, again, sports fans, a lot of this stuff is not new. It's been known for quite some time. It's been known not only in Western Canada, but in many other parts of the world. So it's it should not come as a surprise that Bio-Sul is behaving similarly, if not, as good or better than previous knowledge. So it was good to be able to dissect all of that and identify it. This is just a slide from the report that shows two things. It shows that the control has got a shit block of sulfur in it, and in the first cycle, because they were simulating direct seeding, there was very little release of elemental sulfur to sulfate in that first cycle. But then after soil sampling and some stirring of the soil, etc., you can see in the treatments in the bottom half, the shaded treatments, that the sulfur levels spiked up dramatically. And so again, the initial growth cycle 1 was done with simulated direct seeding. Growth cycle 2 was done after some stirring of the soil, some more exposure of the elemental sulfur to the organisms in the soil, and boom, away the elemental sulfur goes. It's stuff that we've known for over 3 decades. Next one. Here's where they used a fairly simple technique that didn't identify specific organisms, species of organisms, but identified different groups of organisms that were in the material. And you can see that there is organisms in the compost, in the sulfur compost. The only place they didn't find the sulfur-reducing bacteria was either in the control or the lowest rates of application. But every other treatment identified that, yes, there are organisms specific to sulfur in the compost, and basically corroborates what Bio-Sul has been saying, or BioCycle has been saying since day one. The compost contains organisms that initiate the conversion process. The trick now is to identify specifically which organisms they are, and we're working on that. The groups that I have samples to are working away at it a lot slower than I had hoped they would be, but those specific results will be available sometime here in the near future, I hope.
I also have a question here from the audience. It's from Jenica Grant from Carlisle Liquid Starters. With the sulfur compost increasing iron in plant tissue, is that not a worry, especially with iron chlorosis and land with lots of high iron levels already?
Oh boy. Well, in general, that's a really good question, and it's not one that I have a really quick answer for. I would say this is how I would answer it agronomically. There may be the odd circumstance where an increase in iron could be a concern. I don't think that I've ever actually stumbled into one in my entire agronomic career. So there might be the odd circumstance, but I would think in general, increased iron, particularly in the grains we grow. So, when our forefathers first came here, one of the first things they had to start doing was enriching wheat flour with niacin or iron, right? They had to start supplementing salt with iodine, because notoriously Western Canada is, once you create that end product, those end products are notoriously deficient in those types of elements. So my first blush would be more iron would be a good thing, but there likely are the odd circumstances where a person would have to look closer. But having said that, this is biological acidity, which is a lot different than the chemical acidity from fertilizers. So I would love to get my hands on some of that soil and or at least visit where some of those weird circumstances are and have a deeper look. In general, more iron in the crops we grow, it would be very much a beneficial thing. There's about 3 billion people wandering around this planet with significant iron deficiencies. And there's another nearly 3 billion people wandering around this planet with significant zinc deficiencies. So if we think a little bit bigger, I think if we could show that elemental sulfur, Bio-Sul sulfur, increases the concentration of those two micronutrients in our end products. And I have said for years that that nutrient density is a really, really big issue that sooner or later the industry will gravitate to. If we could show that, I think that would be a very positive thing in 90+% of circumstances. There might be the odd circumstance where it's not positive; it could be negative. But I don't think I've ever ran into one.
I got the thumbs up emoticon from Jenica Grant, so I think you did an awesome job of answering that question. Thank you. I have another one here from Tom Bone of Axiom Ag from the Yorkton, Saskatchewan region, the pierogi curtain as they affectionately call it. Are we safe to apply recommended rates of Bio-Sul on low pH soils, 5.5 to 6, given its slow breakdown?
Well, the flippant and quick answer is yes. But having said that, obviously when we're dealing with those kind of pHs, and given the fact, so here's a little factoid for the folks on the call, and I'm sure the question is from someone who understands this very well. But if we take a random soil sample from a field, say it's a 160-acre field, and we take a random sample, and the pH comes back 5.5 from that random sample, I can tell you with pretty darn good confidence that parts of that field will be as low as 4.5, and other parts of that field will be as high as 6.5. This is what I was talking about before with variable rate application of lime and or variable rate application of anything, elemental sulfur for that matter, is that the challenge, the opportunity for the future is to identify those areas in the field that are more at risk than other areas of the field, and then begin to address those risks or those realities in a integrated manner. So I would say the rates that are being advocated, 200 to 300 pounds of Bio-Sul per acre, in those circumstances, given that there's a wide range of particle sizes, et cetera, I would say it's very much still agronomically sound. But what the overarching concern that I have from a question like that is, man, we got to start thinking about figuring out how to get some lime on this ground, how to develop some strategies where we're creating minimally zones of alkalinity as opposed to zones of acidity, figuring out how we can get some diammonium phosphate into the region, because diammonium phosphate as a phosphate fertilizer creates alkalinity around the granules composed as compared to monoammonium phosphate, which creates like some really serious chemical acid. So it's a really good question. In the short term, I think the better approach, because of the slow nature and the biological nature of the sulfur release and the acidity release, I think elemental sulfur is a better way to go than with the traditional sulfate sources. Really? I hope that made some sense.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so just keep flipping here, Dano. So again, this is stuff straight from the report. So that, and the report's available. So if anybody wants to look at the report, Dan and I are more than happy to share it with you. All this table is showing is that as the rate of the sulfur compost increased, the trend was for lower and lower soil pH. Again, if you look at the rates of application here, they were astronomically high when we got up to that rate 5. It's exactly what we would expect. It tells us that things are breaking down in year one when they're applied appropriately, and the breakdown rate is being reflected in the amount in the soil pH, which basically is a reflection of the amount of acidity that's accumulating in that soil, and it's just there. So reducing soil pH is a clear indication of the conversion of elemental sulfur to sulfate. And this is under growth chamber conditions, perfect conditions, 21 degrees, I think, moist soil the whole time, et cetera, so optimal conditions to create optimal opportunity for oxidation from elemental to sulfate, and in the process creating that acidity. Next, Daniel. So all I did was I then took the data that they presented, and I I'm providing here some graphical representation of that, because for most of us, something visual is a lot more useful or powerful than something tables and numbers. And so all I've done here is I've essentially taken the table and turned it into a graph. And it basically visually shows the same thing that the table did. As total sulfur declines in the soil samples, that clearly indicates the conversion of the elemental to sulfate. And you can see in cycle 1, there's some pretty big numbers, but after growth cycle 2, those numbers are declining, and that's again another way to show the breakdown of elemental sulfur, the conversion of elemental sulfur to sulfate sulfur in the soil. That comes out of the report as well. Another graphical representation. Next, Daniel. How much soil sulfate sulfur was in the soil after the harvest? And again, because cycle 1 was a simulated direct seeding application, the rate of conversion was rather small, which would not be unexpected given the knowledge the last over 3 decades. But once the material was mixed through soil sampling, etc., everything took off like crazy. And so, again, clear indicators that we've got very rapid and prolonged release of elemental sulfur, release of sulfate from the elemental sulfur. And then just some more graphical stuff. So as I mentioned earlier, the soil that they picked was not a sulfur-deficient soil. After growth cycle 1, they did measure the sulfate levels in the soil, and now I've averaged the sulfate values across the straight compost and the sulfur compost treatments. And you'll see that the compost by itself, the levels of sulfur found in the soil decreased, and that's to be expected because there's very little sulfur in the compost itself. And the sulfur compost, despite the fact that the material was applied in a direct seeding manner, was able to maintain the sulfur levels in the soil while increasing yields by an average of 19% over the check and the compost alone treatment. So I think we got growth cycle 2 now. By the time we get to growth cycle 2, again averaging the sulfur content of the soil across all of the different rates, you can see that the sulfur compost treatments are creating or liberating a whole bunch of sulfur sulfate into the soil system, not to be unexpected. And then now we're looking at the final net soil sulfate sulfur levels. So we've taken out what was in the check. Now the weird part here is that they only sampled the 0 to 5 centimeter depth. So they only sampled the top 2 inches of an 8-inch depth of soil. So that whatever numbers that we are seeing here, the numbers truly are likely higher than that, because as we all know, sulfate sulfur is mobile, and if they would have sampled the entire depth of the soil, they probably would have found even more sulfur. but they didn't for whatever reason, and here's the results. As the rate of sulfur compost increased, the rate of the net found sulfate sulfur in the soil also increased, which is totally expected from past research and over the last number of decades. And here's my conclusions finally. So from the third-party research done by Alberta Innovates in cooperation with the City of Edmonton and Terra Vita, utilizing the City of Edmonton compost, Terra Vita waste-based pad elemental sulfur, very, very similar product as compared to Bio-Sul. They identified that there were specific sulfur organisms present in the compost sources. We've been saying that. I think it is part of the reason why we're seeing rapid release of elemental sulfur to sulfate to crops. So we've got very small particles to very large particles, and there's organisms in the material to help initiate that process once the conditions allow it. Simulated direct seeding placement greatly reduced the growth cycle 1 conversion of elemental sulfur to sulfate. I'm not sure why anyone would do that when you're trying to optimize the utilization of elemental sulfur, but that's what they did, and that's clearly obvious in when you look at the data closely. Sulfur compost, the biomass yield of the crops, despite the fact that the soil was deficient in sulfur, was not deficient in sulfur and extremely deficient in nitrogen. So again, if they would have picked a soil that was sulfur deficient and would have supplemented with large amounts of nitrogen, I'm pretty sure there would have been a much more positive response. Sulfur compost increased the uptake of nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, boron, copper, iron, manganese, and zinc. Only potassium decreased. That's big. For me, that's huge. Elemental sulfur oxidation was significant after soil mixing prior to growth cycle 2. So again, during soil sampling and everything else, they obviously stirred up the soil, and the amount of sulfate sulfur that came out of the sulfur compost treatments exploded. And it's exactly what I would expect given past experience and past research, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, sulfur compost is an effective source of crop-available sulfur when applied to optimize particle dispersion and soil contact. In other words, growth cycle 2 basically proved or reproved what we've known for over 3 decades in Western Canada. The way to effectively utilize elemental sulfur in the short term is to simply broadcast it on the soil surface and forget about it. Let Mother Nature work to our benefit. The one thing about Bio-Sul, because it's composted, we don't need Mother Nature to assist us as much as, say, a Tiger 90 or a Keg River 9085, because Mother Nature has done her work in the compost pile. And so for those of us that are still into some tillage and stuff like that, normally with the bentonitic sulfurs, we would say broadcast and leave it on the soil surface for at least a couple of rainstorms so that the rain can disperse the particles and optimize soil contact. With this product, I don't think you have to wait at all, because Mother Nature has done most of her nasty work in the compost pile, and then the spreading process has enhanced that work of Mother Nature. So that's the conclusions from the study. I think for me, it's always elemental sulfur has always been about keeping things simple, and that's where Dan and I came up with the Keep It Simple Sulfur concept, which turned into the KISS music at the Farm Forum event, which turned into some other insanity. But it was a lot of fun, and hopefully this past hour or so of going through that third-party research is helpful to everybody. And again, I'm always available for questions, emails, phone calls, that sort of thing. If there's more of that, and like I said, I don't need to do my interview for another 2 hours, so I'm more than happy to hang in here for the duration.
Well, thanks so much for your presentation, Elston. That's absolutely amazing as always. And I think everybody's listening can get a feel for the scope of your knowledge, and really this presentation just scratches the surface of that. So I'm going to open it up to the crowd. And we're in conversation mode. So if there's any questions out there, and if you're not asking a question, please mute your phone. But feel free to ask Elston a question.
Cricket.
Do you have any questions out there? Go ahead.
On the experiment where you had a 19% increase, was that yield or was that biomass?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The increase was in biomass because they did not actually collect the grain yield, which to me seems strange, but it was, it was biomass.
Great question.
We don't have any,
Do you have any other questions out there?
unless it's that.
Say again?
You okay?
Want to try that again?
Yeah, we
Daniel,
didn't quite
can you help?
catch that. Yeah, I don't know if we're getting anything other than background noise there.
Okay.
Got a text coming in here from Jesse Clark. If you did high amounts of elemental floated with 1152 or 1620, would it speed up the breakdown of phos?
So the short answer is more than likely. If we think about products like Jumpstart or Tag Team, they were initially designed, identified as organisms in the soil that created biological acidity, which would make sulfur not only from the soil but from fertilizers more available. So this is a different way of getting at that, but it's essentially doing the same thing. We've got organisms that are creating a biological acidity as they break down particles of elemental sulfur, and if that acidity happened to happen in the vicinity of a 1620 or 1152 granule, should make sense and should follow that the result would be very similar to Jumpstart or Tag Team. So the short answer is yes. The problem with all of that is how do we get the proximity of the elemental sulfur particle to the 1620 or the 1152? That's the $64,000 question there. But if you had them in the same spot, absolutely.
Great answer, Elston. Do we have any other questions out there for Elston today? Going once.
Hey, if there's no more questions, I hope everybody had an awesome Christmas and everybody's going to have a very prosperous 2017. I hope some of you got my moose card. Had a lot of fun putting that together. And yeah, it's as usual a pleasure to help in any way with the So I don't know if we're done here, Daniel, but thanks for the opportunity.
I'm just going to wrap things up, if that's cool, unless you have
Cool.
anything else to add, Elston.
Yeah, I'm good.
Perfect. Well, Elston, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule in Spokane, Washington. We really appreciate it. I'm just going to say a few words and wrap this webinar up. Thanks for everybody attending today. We had over 30 attendees. This is our first webinar. That's very exciting for us, and we're really honored that you would join us, and we hope that you got great value out of it. I can't stop myself being a bit of a salesman without giving some sort of pitch for the product at the end here. What I'd like to suggest, if you do have interest in this product, please do look us up, contact us. We have an early order program on right now, and it's to your advantage to get the product in place for spring. I know that we've had crazy weather going into this fall, and there's a lot of fertilizer yet to go down in the ground before those plants pop up. But take a look at our website. We can explain the pricing to you, but you can literally go here and see all the inner workings of how the price of Bio-Sul works versus other fertilizers you might be utilizing. And if you guys are looking at getting enough fertilizer down, as Elston is advocating today, consider that Bio-Sul is around 17, 18 cents a pound, depending where you're located. And you can get it professionally applied by our network of trusted applicators in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, or by eSpread in Alberta for around that 23, 24 cents per pound. If you go on our website, you'll see exactly where our applicators are located in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. If you're looking for product in Alberta, it's very simple. Just look up eSpread or go to the BioCycle website and you'll find your way there very quickly. And we are all over social media. You can find a ton of great information on not only our website, but our YouTube channel has a lot of videos that explain the product. One thing that we didn't really get into very much today, it's a very interesting aspect of this product, is the whole sustainability story, which is outlined in great detail on our videos and on our website. I think that's a great thing for all of us to be a part of in this day and age. And with that, thank you all for attending. We really appreciate your time. Hopefully it was great value, and we look forward to doing more of these in the future. And if you have any questions or comments, please email me at dan@aberhartagsolutions.ca. Feel free to look us up and ask for the recording or any of the data that you saw here today, any of the spreadsheets that were talked about. If you need some barbecue sauce, whatever it is that we can help you with, please reach out. So thanks so much for attending. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And I can tell you, we're looking forward to 2017 because it's going to be a killer time for everyone. I think we're all really excited about going forward. So with that, Elston, thanks so much.
Hey, thanks, Dan. A pleasure as usual.
All right.
Happy New Year, everybody.
All right. Goodbye. Have a great one. Thanks so much for attending.